When we log on to Facebook or search with Google, most of us know that we're paying for those services not with money, but with our personal data. Now, a new report from Amnesty International says that price has become too high to pay, and the two tech giants are, quote, a threat to human rights. That report, you see it here, is titled Surveillance Giants, How the Business Model of Google and Facebook Threatens Human Rights. It lays out a case in some 60 pages that the two companies are now too large to avoid in our daily lives. Facebook has responded to that report, saying it, quote, fundamentally disagrees, and stating in part, a person's choice to use Facebook's services and the way we collect, receive, or use data is all clearly disclosed and acknowledged by users and cannot meaningfully be likened to the involuntary and often unlawful government surveillance. Well, joining me now is the lead author of that study, Joe Westby. He's also a researcher on technology, big data, and human rights for Amnesty Tech. Joe, I mean, this is a massive report. We're talking 60 pages. I mean, there aren't really any new revelations here, but the conclusions I find really striking. I mean, it calls these companies' control over our digital lives one of the defining human rights challenges of our times. Why is that?
Thanks, and thanks for having me on. I think that's right. Really, the scale of the dominance of these platforms and the way that Facebook and Google are profiting from people's most intimate information really does pose a systemic threat to human rights for billions of people around the world. These companies rely on harvesting vast amount of data about everything that we do in the digital world, and then through the use of sophisticated algorithmic tools, knowing virtually everything about us. And if a government had done this, it would have been completely intolerable. But these companies are just doing it to sell ads. And I think people are now waking up to the fact that this is a serious threat to our rights, and it's time to overhaul the business model that these companies rely on.
How do you think we've gotten to that point where what you say is a company is doing something we'd never tolerate from a government? How have we gotten there? How have we allowed that to happen?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think if you look at the company's business model when they first started, they were much more privacy respecting. But as they have grown in size and scale to the point where really it is impossible to navigate the digital world without coming under their corporate surveillance machine, the companies have been able to gradually erode our privacy and threaten our rights in a whole host of ways without being held fully accountable. And I think, you know, we're increasingly now seeing the symptoms of this deeper problem pretty much every week. You know, just last week there was a Financial Times investigation about how the companies, dozens of ad tech companies, including, of course, Google and Facebook, who sit at the heart of this system, were receiving highly sensitive health data from health websites, including medical symptoms, diagnoses, fertility information. That is the opposite of privacy and is an intrusion into our private lives.
Now, I want to take a look at what else Facebook had to say in response to your report. Here's one bit of their response. They say, our business model is what allows us to offer an important service where people can exercise foundational human rights to have a voice, freedom of expression, and be able to connect, freedom of association and assembly. I mean, I'm sure you've also been following the situation in Iran. The internet there was completely shut down during anti-government protests. Many people there could not use a tool like Facebook or a tool like WhatsApp to communicate. So on the other hand, there are some important pro-democracy features to these companies as well, right?
Yes, absolutely, and we recognize that. In fact, that's exactly the problem. The scale of these platforms, they've become the global public square that billions of people rely on to express themselves online, to engage with modern society. That's the problem. In order to realize our human rights in the digital age, we are forced to consent to a system which is predicated on human rights abuse, and that is an impossible choice for people to face, and that's exactly why, governments need to address the scale and dominance of these platforms, and radically overhaul the business model so that we can move towards a rights-respecting internet, which really, restores the promise of the internet for our rights and for society.
Of course, some governments have been taking action. The General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, was enacted here in the EU last year. That could be one way to go about it. Joe Westby, he's a researcher on technology, big data, and human rights for Amnesty International. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.